Hello, I'm Elizabeth of Lore, and today I am transmitting from my spaceship of creativity and art magic. And just a note, my spaceship is parked in this really cool, artist collective, and there's someone doing some work. So if you hear noise, if you're picking that up, just know that's creativity happening. Okay. Um, so the other day I posted a brief overview of the multiverse. And I think most of you got it. I think most of you understood. It wasn't in English, but I think most of you understood. However, I did think maybe it would be useful to post an English translation of the brief overview of the multiverse, so I'm going to do that. Now, in English, it takes a lot more time to explain the whole multiverse. I don't think I can do it in one video. So today, I'm going to focus my English translation of a brief overview of the multiverse on timelines. So, I also posted a video about how you are on your highest timeline, and that is true. However, I did get some feedback from some people saying things like, oh, my highest timeline is chaotic. What's going on? I don't want to be on my highest timeline then. So I'm going to kind of address that here. Okay, so at the highest level, right, as many spiritual and religious practices teach us, we are all one consciousness, experiencing itself in a game or a play or a story, however you want to conceive of it, where we have divided ourselves into all of these different faces and different beings. But we're really all one consciousness. Okay, that's true. I'm not going to go to that level, the one consciousness level. I'm right now addressing the level of individuation in which we are currently experiencing. That's where we're currently incarnated. If you are watching this video and you have a human body and a name and a life, then you're in a state of individuation. You have an individual self. And that individual self has a unique energy signature, a unique core frequency that is yours. It's unique to you. Now, yes, if you have a twin flame, that person also has the same energy signature and the same core frequency as you. Also true, but again, in this video, I'm not going into that topic. So I acknowledge the oneness of all. I acknowledge the phenomenon of twin flames, but this video is about you. Is about the state of individuation that you're experiencing as someone incarnated in a human body. Okay? So, you have your own energy signature, you have your own core frequency, the same thing, that makes up who you are in this state of individuation that you are currently experiencing, right? That we are currently experiencing. And that being that is incarnated with this energy signature, this core frequency, is having an individual experience. So for me, that's Elizabeth of Lore in my spaceship that is parked in New York, right? For you, it's whatever your current life circumstances are. However, my core frequency is also incarnated in many other times and places because time, linear time as we experience it, is an illusion. And everything is actually happening in the now. But in these denser dimensions, we experience linear time because that's how the now is processed by our minds. That is how the density of a physical dimension affects the now. It translates it into linear time. So there's a past, a present, and a future, right? So within that, we tend to think of some of those other incarnations of our energy signature and our core frequency as past lives or parallel lives or other lifetimes. And there's nothing wrong with thinking of it that way. But what I've channeled, what I've come to understand, is that those are actually happening simultaneously, and they are other timelines. They're other timelines. So a lot of times when people talk about shifting timelines, what they mean is, for example, to use me as an example, I would shift into a timeline where I'm still Elizabeth of lore. I'm still where I am, but now I have $1 million coming my way, right? In fact, if you have any kind of past life recollection, maybe you remember yourself living in Tokyo in the 1700s, or in the fairy realm, or ancient Egypt, whatever, and you're like, that's my past life. That's really your energy frequency. That's you, your core frequency. So you in another timeline. So the way this works is sort of similar to the butterfly effect. If you're familiar with that idea, that concept, it is basically, it's from a science fiction story, but it's basically the idea that if you go back in time, if you time travel and you alter something, it can radically change everything. So in that story, it's that someone kills a butterfly way back in time, and then the future, because even though it was this tiny little thing where they just killed a butterfly, the energetic impact of that one single change multiplied across time ended up creating a world that looked so radically different from the world in which they had time traveled from. Right? So it's kind of like that. So we have our core frequency. Let's say our core frequency is it's not a perfect metaphor, but let's say the core frequency is the origin point, and then we send it out, right? And we send it out to so many different places, so many different lifetimes than just what we remember, if we remember any past lives. And some of those are going to be radically different from the one in which you're consciously experiencing right now. Okay? And some of them are going to be very similar. So there's going to be a version of Elizabeth that is still in a spaceship in New York, but circumstances are a little bit different. And then there's going to be the version of Elizabeth that lives in the fairy realm. But those are me. In a way, they are the same life. Because I am that life. I am that origin point in this story. But it's a different timeline. Okay? So, within that, we have what I call timeline clusters. Okay? So a timeline cluster is essentially the life that you know. It's a life that looks like itself basically, but can have things change. So to give a more concrete example, again, a timeline cluster, Elizabeth of lore, living in a spaceship in New York, right? Different timeline cluster. Me as a fairy, living in the fairy realm. That's a different timeline cluster than Elizabeth of lore, living in a spaceship in New York. So when we talk about shifting timelines, we're usually talking about shifting within our own timeline cluster. Because I'm not saying it's impossible to shift into one of those very distant timelines, but it's going to be a lot more difficult because you have grounding, what people would call barriers to that shift, but what grounds us in this consciousness, in this timeline cluster, things like belief, things like structural systems, right? It's a lot harder to believe that you're going to just suddenly be a fairy in the fairy realm for most people under most circumstances than it is to believe that maybe you can wake up with something in your life altered, but your life looking mostly the same except for this little thing altered, So when people talk about like manifesting, a lot of times what they're talking about is shifting within their timeline cluster to a different path. So what I mean by that is what most people will call a different timeline, I call a different path. Now, what that means is that within your timeline cluster, within this highest timeline that you're in, you have certain points, certain events and experiences energetically that are preset, that are your destiny, right? So maybe you're destined to live in Italy one day. Completely random example. I don't feel that I'm destined to that, but maybe that's your destiny, for example. But before you get there, maybe that's what you feel your highest timeline is. Before you get there, you have certain experiences that are going to get you there or that are going to happen before you get there. And those experiences are the path. And that path you can shift. So your destiny is going to happen. how you get there or what happens along the way, you can change that. So you're still in your highest timeline cluster, but you can switch your pathway. And you can do that through a lot of the techniques that people use for things like manifestation or timeline shifting, affirmations, gratitude, meditation, magic spells, what have you, whatever you choose. You can use different things to shift your path. I like to think of it sort of as a choose your own adventure story, right? So you are on a certain path and there's a point that you're going to get to on that path. And then when you get to that point, you can make a choice. When you get to a certain point, you can make a choice and you can go to page 87 or you can go to page 3. And from there, you're going to continue forward until you get to another choice point. So you're on your highest timeline. You have certain moments, certain experiences, certain destinies that are happening on that timeline, no matter what path you take. But what path you take, you can choose and you can shift at any moment. So if you're feeling like your highest timeline is chaotic, it's not that your highest timeline is necessarily chaotic, it's that the path you're on within that timeline cluster is chaotic. So you can do something to shift to a different path. If you're uncomfortable with your path, you can shift it. And you're not going to affect that you're on your highest timeline. You're not going to alter your fate or your destiny. You're not going to alter what is yours, what is meant for you. Those moments that are stuck in your cluster are going to happen, whether they're negative or positive. Those are there for you, right? But you can change the path that takes you there, and you can change what happens along that path. I used to be a hard determinist, and a determinism is the belief that we have no free will and that everything that happens is preordained, or it's been ordained by the events that preceded it. And you don't really have free will. I'm still a determinist. I still believe that we have less free will than a lot of people think we do, and that we have certain destined points, and I've experienced this and I can feel when I'm experiencing one of them. But I do now think and have experienced that we can shift, we have free will at the level of being able to shift our path to those moments. Now, once we shift our path, I think once again we go into a realm where it's sort of pre-written. Again, going to that choose your own adventure analogy, it's like that. If we flip to a different page, we've chosen to flip to that page, but then the story is written from that point forward, right? Until we get to another choice point. So I don't really believe that we totally have free will on our highest timeline, because we have agreed to incarnate into our highest timeline where we have certain things that are destined for us and that are meant for us. But we have a level of free will in that we can choose our own adventure. We can choose the path we take within the construct of the timeline cluster. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about, was just that overview of how that works. Second is something cool about this. So because those other versions of ourselves, those timelines that we might conceive of as past lives or other lives that feel very different, where we have a different name, a different body, a different world that we are inhabiting, or a different time within the world that we're inhabiting, because those are actually just other timelines of our same self, we have ready access to them, at least through the level of consciousness. Actually incarnating into them might be a little bit difficult, again, because of the grounding forces of belief and memory. However, we can access them telepathically, we can access them psychically, and we can commune with our other selves, because we really are, it really is just like when you're talking to yourself in your mind. You're just doing that, because that is you. And here's what you can do with that. So if you remember a version of yourself in a past life that had some really important information or some really cool skill that you would like to have, you can psychically commune with that version of yourself and gain access to that. Now, if you're like, hey, I have a memory where I have another self, a past life, where I'm a very skilled woodcarver, and I've communed with that, and I'm not a skilled woodcarver now. So are you lying? No, I'm not lying. Here's the thing. You still are incarnated in this dense dimension where you have a body, and a skill like that, like something like wood carving or any kind of physicality that requires any kind of physicality, is also going to have a body memory. And you're going to have the limitations of your physical form. So if you have never carved wood before, you can access the information on how to do it and to do it really well, but your body still needs to learn how to do that. So you're going to have to train your body to do it. You're like, well, how is that different than just learning a new skill? It's different because you actually have the information and you have the skill set in your frequency. So you're going to pick it up faster, but you still have to train your body. But that's easy because all you have to do is practice. All you have to do is train your body, is just continue to practice. And I bet you that you're going to find that your proficiency is a lot higher than you would expect it to be for something that you've never done before. So one example of this is that I have another version of myself in another, what I would call, or what people would call a past life. This other version of myself knew how to use dancing as a very powerful form of magic. So I was able to commune with that version of myself and to learn how to do that. Now, my physical body is not a trained dancer. So what it looks like when I dance as Elizabeth of Lore versus how that being danced is different. That being was, in a performance arts aspect, a better dancer than me, right? But I can still do magic with dancing. And if I stretch and tone my body and practice at dancing, I'm sure that I can be as good as that version of myself. I just have to put the body memory into this form. But I still have the skill. I still have the ability now. And that's very easy. You can do that instantaneously. You really just have to commune with that being, with that version of yourself. And you can do that through meditation. You can do that through breath work. You can do that through plant medicine. You can do that through creativity. Okay, here's my one plug in the video. If you're in the New York area on March 20th, I have a workshop that is about channeling through creative writing. So it's at Gaia no Maya, March 20th at 7 p.m. if you want to attend. And it is basically, we have a sound bath and we go into a channeling state, and then I lead you through some prompts that will help you to use the form of creative writing, of fiction writing, to channel into other worlds and other states of being. And that's one way that you can also do this, is that you can intentionally use creative writing to channel another version of yourself and to gain that information. And my workshop's going to be awesome. It's actually going to be in the Himalayan Salt Cave at Gaia no Maya. So if you're in New York, come on March 20th at 7 p.m. Come experience the salt cave and the sound bath and the writing prompts. If you're not in New York, though, you can do this at home. You can just do a creative writing practice, or a visual arts practice, or a performing arts practice, or whatever it is for you. There's so many different ways. It's whatever comes to you, whatever feels natural to you. You can just sit in your room and mentally talk to yourself. Be like, I want to talk to this other version of myself and ask this information, and just have a conversation. It can be that simple. And then you can gain that knowledge or that skill. And if it's something that requires some physicality, you may have to train your body. But you have the information, you have the knowledge, because that is you. It's not a different lifetime. It's just another timeline, and it's you. So you are able to access that. So that's another really cool aspect of the multiverse that I think is very useful for people to know. That anything that any version of you, any skill, any knowledge that any version of you has is available to you in this incarnation at any time. So use that however you'd like. And also, if you want to, you're in your highest timeline. You don't have to be afraid that you're going to leave your highest timeline, that you're going to lose your destiny. But if the path you're on is uncomfortable to you, you can shift it. So you're not stuck. You can relax. You don't have to be afraid that you're going to lose your highest timeline. And also, you do have the power to shift the chapter of the story you're in, to shift the path you're on to wherever you're going, and experience it a little bit differently. All right, so that's it. That's my summary of timelines for today, my little brief overview of the multiverse section. I hope you enjoyed it.